Imagine it's 25,000 years ago. You're crouched at the edge of a frozen tree line somewhere in what will eventually become Central Europe. It's winter, the kind of winter that kills people quietly. You haven't eaten in 2 days. Your hunting party tracked a herd of red deer for 6 hours yesterday and came back with nothing. The deer heard you coming. They always hear you coming. You're loud, you're slow, you smell like smoke and sweat, and everything you chase can outrun you in the first 10 seconds. Tonight, you'll sleep on frozen ground near a fire that you have to keep feeding because if it goes out, the things that hunt in the dark will find you before morning. You don't have walls, you don't have a fence. You have your ears, your eyes, and the quiet hope that whatever is out there decides someone else looks easier. This is life without dogs. And for most of human history, this was just life. We take dogs for granted now. They sit on our couches, eat food from little bowls with their names printed on the side, and develop separation anxiety when we leave for work. But somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago, depending on which geneticist you ask, something happened between wolves and humans that may have altered the entire trajectory of our species. Not agriculture, not fire, not the invention of the wheel, a partnership with an animal that could do the things we couldn't. And the question nobody really asks enough is this: what would have happened if it never did? What if wolves had stayed wolves? What if no curious canine ever crept close enough to a human campfire to begin the chain of events that eventually produced every golden retriever, every border collie, every absurd little chihuahua on the planet? Would we still be here? Would we be the same? The answer, according to a growing number of researchers, is that we probably would be, but not like this. Not even close. Let's start with the thing that was killing ancient humans more consistently than any predator on the planet: hunger. Hunting without dogs was genuinely, statistically terrible. Think about what hunting actually meant for an early human. You have no rifle, no bow, not yet. You have a sharpened stick, maybe a stone-tipped spear if you're lucky, and your own 2 legs. The animal you're trying to kill can hear better than you, smell better than you, run faster than you, and has spent its entire evolutionary history learning to avoid things that look exactly like you. Most hunts failed. Across studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups that still practice persistence hunting without dogs, failure rates regularly exceed 50%. Some research puts it closer to 70 or 80% for large game. That means most of the time you spent an entire day burning thousands of calories chasing something and came home with nothing to show for it. And a failed hunt wasn't just disappointing, it was dangerous. A band of 30 people that fails to bring in enough calories across a bad week starts losing children first, then the elderly, then everyone else. The margin between survival and starvation in the Pleistocene was thin enough that a few consecutive failed hunts could end a lineage. Now add a dog. Anthropologist Angela Perry, who has spent years studying the archaeological evidence of human-dog hunting partnerships, has documented something striking across multiple modern hunter-gatherer societies. Groups that hunt with dogs consistently bring back significantly more game than groups that hunt without them. Among the Ayete people of the Philippines, hunting success rates nearly double when dogs are involved. Among the Jivaro of South America and Aboriginal Australian groups, the same pattern holds. Dogs don't just make hunting slightly more convenient, they transform it into something fundamentally different. A dog can smell a deer from over a kilometer away. It can track a scent trail hours old through rain, mud, and shifting wind. It can flush prey out of dense cover and drive it toward waiting hunters. It can corner a wounded animal and hold it in place until the humans arrive with spears. It can do all of this without instruction, because this is exactly what wolves were already built to do for millions of years before they ever saw a campfire. Humans didn't teach dogs to hunt. Dogs taught humans how to hunt better. And without them, our ancestors were essentially trying to compete in a game where every other player had better equipment, better senses, and a several 100 million-year head start. Now scale that up. Think bigger. Not deer, mammoths. In 2011, a team of researchers led by Mietje Germonpré at the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences re-examined a collection of large canid skulls from Predmosty, an archaeological site in the Czech Republic dating to about 27,000 years ago. The skulls were too large for wolves, too different in shape to be anything obviously wild. Germonpré argued that they were early domesticated dogs, or at the very least proto-dogs, animals in the process of becoming something between wolf and pet. And the site was surrounded by mammoth bones, hundreds of them. The working theory is that these early dogs helped humans hunt mammoths, not by attacking the animals directly, obviously a 40 kilo kilogram canid isn't taking down a 6-ton mammoth, but by tracking herds over enormous distances, by harassing and distracting wounded animals, by helping drive them toward natural traps like ravines or bogs where hunters could finish the job. A single mammoth kill could feed a band of 25 people for weeks. That's not a meal. That's the difference between a community that survives winter and one that doesn't exist by spring. If dogs made mammoth hunting even slightly more reliable, the caloric payoff was staggering, and that's a survival margin that nothing else in the human toolkit could replicate. But hunting was only part of it. Here's the thing that doesn't get discussed nearly enough. Night. Before dogs, every human group that fell asleep was gambling with its life. You could post sentries, you could keep a fire burning, you could sleep in shifts and hope whoever was watching didn't drift off. But human senses after dark are genuinely pathetic by the standards of the predators that were hunting you. Your eyes adjust to darkness slowly, and still can't compete with a leopard's tapetum lucidum, that reflective layer behind the retina that essentially gives cats night vision. Your hearing is adequate but not impressive. Your sense of smell is almost non-existent compared to the things circling your camp. A large predator approaching from downwind could be within 15 meters of a sleeping group before any human registered its presence. By then, it was already too late for somebody. Now consider what even a single proto-dog sleeping at the edge of camp changes about that equation. A canine nose contains roughly 300 million olfactory receptors. A human nose has about 6 million. A dog's hearing range extends well into frequencies that are completely inaudible to us. And most importantly, dogs are light sleepers that react instantly and loudly to unfamiliar sounds and smells. They don't need to be trained to alert at approaching threats. That response is hardwired into their neurology from 40 million years of canid evolution. The moment something unfamiliar approached in the dark, the dog knew. And the moment the dog reacted, the humans knew. That warning, even just 5 or 10 extra seconds of it, could mean the difference between grabbing a spear and organizing a defense versus being dragged unconscious into the dark by something with 6-inch claws. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups, including the Tisimane people of Bolivia, have documented that communities with dogs experience significantly fewer nighttime predator encounters. Not because the dogs fight the predators. They usually don't. They just notice them first. And in a world where not noticing was the primary cause of death, that was worth more than any weapon. Now, here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable and genuinely fascinating. In 2015, anthropologist Pat Shipman at Penn State published a book called The Invaders that proposed something radical. She argued that the domestication of wolves into what she called wolf dogs gave Homo sapiens a decisive competitive advantage over the Neanderthals. Not better brains, not superior language, not some grand cognitive leap. Dogs. Think about the timeline. Neanderthals had survived in Europe for over 300,000 years. They were physically stronger than us. Their brains were as large as ours, in many cases larger. They had fire, sophisticated stone tools, burial practices, possibly art. They were supremely adapted to the European environment in ways that incoming Homo sapiens populations were not. They had been hunting woolly rhinos and cave bears in frozen forests since before our species existed. And yet, within roughly 5,000 to 10,000 years of Homo sapiens arriving in significant numbers, the Neanderthals were gone. Shipman's argument is straightforward. There is no evidence, zero, that Neanderthals ever formed any kind of cooperative relationship with wolves or any other animal. They hunted without animal partners. They guarded their camps without animal sentries. They tracked prey using only their own senses. Homo sapiens, at some point during or just before the expansion into Neanderthal territory, began working with wolves. And that changed the math in ways that compounded silently across centuries. A Homo sapiens hunting party with proto-dogs could locate prey faster, track it through terrain where human senses alone would fail, and bring down larger game with fewer casualties. A Homo sapiens camp, with dogs sleeping at its perimeter, lost fewer people to nighttime predation, which meant more surviving children, which meant a growing population steadily pressing into the same territories where Neanderthal numbers were declining. You don't need a war. You don't need a single dramatic confrontation. You just need one group to be slightly more efficient at surviving bad years than the other, and you let time do the rest. The archaeological record supports this more than you might expect. At Bonn Oberkassel in Germany, researchers found a grave dating to about 14,200 years ago containing 2 humans and a dog. The dog had been sick with canine distemper as a young puppy and had survived for weeks afterward, which means humans cared for it, fed it, kept it alive through an illness that would have killed it in the wild. These people were barely surviving the end of the Ice Age themselves, and they were spending limited food and energy nursing a sick dog back to health. That is not the behavior of a species using a tool. That is the behavior of a species that has formed a bond deep enough to override the cold logic of caloric survival. And that bond, that willingness to invest in each other's survival, was something Neanderthals never developed with any other species. Not everyone agrees with Shipman. Some researchers, including geneticist Gregor Larson at Oxford, argue that the precise timing of dog domestication is still too uncertain to link it directly to the Neanderthal extinction. The oldest undisputed dog remains are about 15,000 years old, well after Neanderthals disappeared. But contested finds at sites like Goyet Cave in Belgium, dated to roughly 36,000 years ago, and the Predmosti skulls at 27,000 years, push the timeline back into the overlap period. The debate is real, but the underlying logic is hard to dismiss entirely. If dogs improved human hunting success by even 15 or 20%, and if they reduced nighttime predator losses by even a small fraction, those advantages compound across hundreds of generations into something that looks less like a minor convenience and more like the difference between a species that expands across the planet and one that quietly disappears. And then there's the cold. This part is surprisingly literal. The Ice Age was not a metaphor. Temperatures across much of Europe and northern Asia were 6 to 10 degrees Celsius lower than today. Winters lasted for months. Frostbite killed. Hypothermia killed faster. Every calorie your body burned to stay warm was a calorie you didn't have for walking, hunting, thinking, or keeping a child alive through the night. Fire helped, but fire only reaches so far when you're sleeping on frozen ground with nothing between you and the wind but animal skins and whatever you could pile on top of yourself. This is where dogs become heaters. A healthy dog maintains a resting body temperature of about 38.5 degrees Celsius, slightly higher than a human's. Sleeping next to dogs, and more importantly being piled on by dogs, provided measurable, genuine warmth to ancient humans during the coldest nights of their existence. Australian Aboriginal communities have a phrase for this that has survived into modern English. They describe a cold night as a three-dog night, meaning the temperature was cold enough that you needed 3 dogs sleeping against you to stay warm through it. That phrase got borrowed by a rock band in the 1960s, which is honestly one of the more unexpected consequences of prehistoric thermoregulation. But the principle was real. Dogs were living blankets that also barked at predators and helped you hunt breakfast the next morning. The efficiency of the whole arrangement is almost ridiculous when you think about it from a pure survival engineering perspective. There's another thing dogs did that almost never gets mentioned. They cleaned up. Human camps produce waste. Bones, scraps, spoiled food, human waste at the edges of settlement areas. All of that attracts insects, rodents, and scavengers, which carry parasites and disease. A dog patrolling and scavenging around the edges of a camp was essentially a biological sanitation system, consuming waste that would otherwise have attracted far more dangerous visitors. In the centuries before anyone had any concept of hygiene or disease transmission, a camp with dogs was by default a slightly cleaner camp. And a cleaner camp was a camp where fewer children died from infections nobody had a name for yet. But here's the part that researchers have only recently started to fully appreciate. Dogs didn't just help humans survive physically. They may have changed us emotionally in ways that made us better at surviving everything else. In 2015, a team led by Miho Nagasawa at Azabu University in Japan published a study in the journal Science showing that when humans and dogs gaze into each other's eyes, both species experience a significant surge of oxytocin, the same hormone that bonds mothers to infants, that builds trust between strangers, that undergirds almost every form of social attachment in mammalian biology. Wolves don't do this with humans, dogs do. Somewhere in the domestication process, dogs evolved the ability to trigger the same neurochemical pathway that humans use to bond with their own children. Think about what that means in a survival context. A species that was already deeply social, already entirely dependent on group cooperation to stay alive, now had a companion that chemically reinforced its capacity for trust and attachment. Dogs may have made humans more bonded to each other, not just to the dogs themselves, but to the group. A band that cooperates better hunts more effectively, shares resources more willingly, raises each other's children more reliably, and holds together through crises that would shatter a less cohesive group. There's also something that gets overlooked when people talk about ancient human survival: moving. Hunter-gatherers didn't stay in one place. They followed herds, tracked seasonal food sources, migrated with the weather, and every time they moved, they carried everything they owned: tools, skins, dried meat, infants, whatever they couldn't leave behind, on their backs, using their own legs, over rough terrain, sometimes for days. A human carrying 20 kilograms of supplies across broken ground burns calories at an alarming rate and moves slowly enough to be vulnerable to every predator in the area. Now imagine that same group with dogs trained or bred to carry packs. A medium-sized dog can carry roughly 25% of its body weight over long distances without significant distress. A band with even 5 or 6 dogs just gained the carrying capacity of an additional adult human without needing to feed that human a full adult's share of calories. Dogs eat scraps. They eat bones. They eat things humans won't touch. The energy economics of dog-assisted transport are almost unfairly efficient. And in a world where every calorie counted, where every extra kilogram of dried meat you could carry might mean the difference between making it to the next camp and collapsing halfway there, dogs were portable infrastructure. Without dogs, would humans have crossed into the Americas? Probably. Eventually. But the earliest confirmed human sites in the Americas include dog remains. The people who walked across Beringia, the land bridge connecting Siberia to Alaska during the last ice age, almost certainly brought dogs with them. Dogs that hauled supplies across frozen tundra. Dogs that tracked unfamiliar game and terrain nobody had ever hunted before. Dogs that kept watch in landscapes full of unknown predators and unknown terrain features that could kill you just as efficiently as any animal. Colonizing an entire hemisphere is a different proposition when you have a partner species that can smell danger, carry weight, and keep you from freezing to death at night. And the Arctic, the Inuit, the Yupik, the Chukchi. These cultures don't just use dogs. They are built around dogs. Dog sleds, which are one of the most efficient forms of overland transport ever developed for frozen terrain, allowed humans to cover enormous distances across ice and snow that would be impassable on foot. A dog team pulling a loaded sled can travel 50 or 60 kilometers in a single day across flat ice. A human walking through the same snow with a pack would be lucky to manage 15. Dogs also served as hunting partners for seals and polar bears, in conditions where human senses alone are nearly useless against the vast white silence of the Arctic. An Inuit hunter waiting at a seal breathing hole in negative 30-degree temperatures relied on his dogs to detect the seal's approach beneath the ice long before he could. Remove dogs from Arctic history, and you effectively remove permanent human habitation from the far north. The people who live at the top of the world live there because dogs made it possible. Full stop. So what would the world actually look like if wolves had never become dogs? Here's the honest version, as best as anyone can reconstruct it. Humans would probably still exist. We had fire, language, tools, and social cooperation long before any wolf wandered close to a campfire. We wouldn't have gone extinct, but we would almost certainly be fewer. Our range would be smaller. Large portions of the Arctic, possibly uninhabited. The Americas, colonized later, or differently, or not at all in the same way. Northern Eurasia in winter, a much harder place to call home. Hunting success rates lower for thousands of additional years, meaning smaller populations, meaning slower accumulation of knowledge, meaning fewer innovations, meaning a longer and more precarious path from campfire to civilization. And maybe, just maybe, we would still be sharing this planet with Neanderthals, or Denisovans, or some other human species that disappeared right around the same time that we showed up with tens of thousands of years of canine partnership quietly stacking the odds in our favor. The partnership between humans and dogs is the oldest interspecies alliance in the history of life on this planet. Older than any other domestication event. Older than farming, pottery, metallurgy, writing, or the wheel. It started with scraps tossed near a fire and a few wolves that were slightly less afraid than the rest. No contract, no plan. No understanding on either side that this was the beginning of something that would reshape continents. And tonight, somewhere near you, there is probably a dog, maybe at your feet, maybe on your couch, maybe taking up more of your bed than seems physically possible for something that weighs 30 kilograms. It doesn't know that its ancestors helped your ancestors survive ice ages, cross continents, and outlast every other human species that ever lived. But now you do. And honestly, it probably still wouldn't move over even if you told it.